Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I am Nicole Forbes with Dennis's 70s, and today we're talking about shade gardening, or as the title, 50 Shades of Green. So, successful gardening in less than full sun. And so, to really start talking about shade gardening, and I hope you can see me back here in my jungle. Uh, I had a lot of fun pulling together plants from the garden center today that really represent kind of the full gamut. As you watch our classes, you realize that I'm a plant fanatic, and so I can't just put like three example plants on the table. Heavens no, there's not even room at all. I don't have plants on the floor, but I just am barely visible here. So lots of options to choose from, and I hope again that these displays that we pull together are at least a little bit inspiring to you to, see kind of a potential landscape in the makings every time we make these collections. Now, before we get into talking about shade in general and really kind of defining shade and then going into all of these great plant selections, couple of things, of course, that I wanted to talk about. One is going into some very extreme heat for us this weekend. It's, first of all, if you've got an extremely shady garden, you're sitting pretty this weekend. So you might be actually uh, not experiencing the heat the same way as those of us that have less tree cover or less of a shady garden. And you may find that, even in triple digits, it's not unbearable to be out in your deep shade or even dappled shade garden. Similarly, your plants will fare much better than those of us who have plants that are out in the full exposed sun. When it's over 100 degrees for more than a day, which we're looking at least 3 days of that, it looks like it's very hard on our plants. It's pretty unusual, and even plants that are sun tolerant are likely to get a sunburn. I'm likely to get a sunburn. We're all likely to get a sunburn. So it is just one of those things that we want to caution all of our gardening friends to stay safe, stay healthy, water early in the morning, and mulch to protect and keep all that water in the soil, reduce evaporation. Pull cover sheets, blankets, shade cloth if you've got it, from wherever you have extra linen storage, and create temporary shade in areas that maybe you have new plantings or plantings that are vulnerable to the temperatures. And some of our flowers are just going to scorch. So as long as we can keep the plants kind of safe and protected themselves, most of our flowers will rebloom. But I watch here at the garden center, roses, the flowers just don't even last more than a day before they kind of get sun worn and bleached out and kind of scorched. So hydrangea flowers, all these kinds of plants, even if we try to keep them hydrated, we may see that our flowers really can't maintain to this temperature. So remember that again, you can cut back and fertilize after the heat spell. And expect a little bit of damage, but of course, do everything you can to keep yourself and your garden safe. Now, in the shade, if you garden in the shade, first of all, you know that there are lots of different types of shade. Just as there are 50 shades of green or more or less, there's many different types of shade and a lot of nuances from soil moisture. So we have wet shade conditions versus dry shade conditions that are under either tree cover that's dense and coniferous, like Douglas fir, or real thirsty, mature tree plantings that have a lot of roots dominating the soil and drink a lot of the water. So that would make us dry shade. Not only are they, the canopy is so dense that it prevents a lot of rain from falling through, but then what moisture does fall into the soil is usually taken up by the dominant root structure or the trees in that shady condition. So wet or dry shade and kind of varying degrees of that. And then of course we have all of the different types of light and amounts of sunlight that a garden may receive. So we're talking about, of course, either morning sun, couple hours perhaps of morning sun and shade by the afternoon. That would be considered like a part shade garden in many cases. But when we discuss a full sun requirement for a plant, full sun really begins at a 6-hour minimum sun exposure. So 6 hours of sun is full sun. 4 to 6 or even 3 to 6 hours would be considered partial sun. Now, most plants that want part sun to shade are not full sun or like reflective heat tolerant. So part sun to shade means that they can take some morning sun, which is usually a little milder, cooler, and a more gentle sun exposure than afternoon sun. And then they would prefer shade by at least the afternoon or an all day kind of dapple or filter where light just kind of plays through tree canopy or tree cover, giving some filtered bright light and a little bit of occasional sunspots. That would again be partial sun. Now that means that anything 3 hours of sun or less is really considered shade. Now it is the most difficult condition in that 3 hours of sun or less is if the 3 hours of sun that the plant gets is that last bit of sun of the day. So the late angled kind of western afternoon sun is usually pretty hot and pretty intense. So a lot of shade plants can burn if they're getting that last, if their only sun is getting the last late hot afternoon sun. So we always have to be a little bit on the sensitive side and just kind of watch for areas that are maybe a little hotter than others when we're using shade plants especially. Now, there's one of my absolute favorite resources that I haven't talked about in quite a while is a website that is specific to the Pacific Northwest, and it is greatplantpicks.org, and that's Picks. So Great Plant Picks, like selections. And if you look at that website, there are lists of plants that thrive in various conditions or kind of by use. And there's an extensive list of shade tolerant plants and photographs of almost all the plants. So they really, again, do a great job on that website of breaking down the different types of shade and highlight plants that are tolerant of wet shade or dry shade, similar to what we're talking about today. And that information was used to help build this handout that we have provided to go along with the class. And the handout information is located as a link right below the title of this video. So the title and description of the video. So click on the link and you'll see a list of the plant names that we are kind of showcasing and talking about today. Now, gardening in the shade, in addition to choosing your plants wisely, again, depending on what's casting the shade and the reason for the shade, if you're under a lot of conifers, and again, it's drier, it's also probably a little bit on the acidic side. So your plant palette is going to require plants that love acid soil or slightly acidic soil at least. And even if you plant something like a hydrangea, deep shade, and we'll talk more about this, but deep shade is probably too dark for hydrangeas to really bloom. So you may not get hydrangea flowers in the full deep shade, but in partial sun or part shade, you can get a hydrangea to bloom. But in acidic soil conditions, as we often have here in the Northwest and even more so in shade, hydrangeas will always tend to go from, if you start in pink, they'll go towards the blue color unless you amend the soil with lime to kind of correct that. But a white hydrangea won't change its colors by the soil conditions. So if you go with white, you're fine, but if you want a pink, you'll need to lime your soil. Otherwise, expect your hydrangeas to slowly turn blue. Now, again, talking through planting under tree roots. That is often where many of us have opportunity in our gardens. Maybe you have a large mature tree that casts a wide canopy of shade, and there's not a lot of plant material that's growing underneath it. There could be a couple of different reasons for that, and a very good odds are that there's not a lot of soil kind of in the topsoil layer, and that there's a lot of root cover in the subsoil that makes it really hard to dig and hard to plant. Now, the one thing that we want to address when we're working around mature trees, or even any trees in the garden, is that you want to avoid raising the soil level. So if you've got ground level where your tree is planted, and now you want to plant around that tree and under the canopy, you don't want to raise up the soil level just because you can't dig down. So it's very important that the tree's roots kind of are at the point in the soil, the depth that they are in, and if you cover them deeper with soil, they're going to come up to the surface to survive. And if they don't come up to the surface, if you bury them too deeply, you can actually kill a tree by burying the root structure. So again, if you can't dig a big hole, you're going to need to plant smaller plants. So look for the smallest containers that you can, because a small plant can make its way into kind of the network of roots over time in its own fashion, much easier than we can chisel away at the hole to make a space for a larger container to go in. So planting smaller and making sure, again, that you are establishment watering, focusing water on that particular planting space with a nice, deep, ample soaking, frequent, but leaving some time in between where the plant goes dry so that it can kind of seek out its own water. And mulching that area. And mulch, you can put a little bit of mulch over the top of the plant in that space, because you're not covering the entire tree's root system. You can mulch around your little planting. It is also possible that even during the winter months, so if you're planting underneath evergreens, such as Douglas firs or Colorado spruce or hemlocks or cedars or anything, if you're planting under conifers or evergreens, you may not get the rainfall that you expect down to the base or underneath the canopy in that shady planting area as you would think maybe you do. So even watering during the winter months or during the rainy season in dense canopy spaces is a critical aspect of keeping your shade garden happy and helping it get established. So wet shade plants and dry shade plants, there's very few crossovers between the two, but when it comes to kind of working in varying degrees of shade, as you notice, and as I mentioned, we really rely on the colors of green and the shades of green, from a golden chartreuse to kind of a lime color. Let's see, here's a lime. New foliage on my holly fern is sort of a bright lime color. Then we have the deep dark leaves of things like Sarkacoka and the Mahoneya leaf here, my Osmanthus leaf, nice and deep dark green. So we have dark green, chartreuse, lime green. Then of course we get into the new growth color that we see on a lot of plants, and often that's kind of a peachy or a coppery tone. So Becky, you're going to have to come a little closer, I think. So we see here on Salal, and against, I'll pull a green leaf of Salal so that we can really see the color change. So we have the newest growth of Salal is this lovely peachy rusty color. And again, the same color we see new growth on the evergreen huckleberry. The Vaccinium ovatum is a great example. And then if you can show over here, We've got gorgeous new growth that is almost a red coppery of the, this is the Scarletta Fetterbush, which is also known as Lacestra, not Lacestra, oh my gosh, I'm having a brain freeze. It is Leucothymum, Leucothaway. And then up on the top of Osmanthus heterophyllus goshiki, the very newest growth of the goshiki osmanthus is that same peachy, coppery, kind of rusty color. So I'll tell you something really cool about that color. And here I dropped my leaf again, but as an example, our Salal Gulfiria Shalon, one of our lovely natives. Salal is one of those ground cover / shrubs. It's a funny plant that's evergreen, makes a flower and a berry, and is, again, native to the Pacific Northwest. It's tolerant of sun or shade, and it's also relatively tolerant of wet or dry soil conditions. So it's one of the few plants that kind of goes into almost all the lists. It has a different habit and grows in a slightly different kind of form depending on whether it's in sun or shade. So in more sun, Salal is a tighter, lower growing bush, 2 feet and under, kind of ground cover-ish. But in more shade and varying degrees of shade, the Salal will open up and be kind of a more open, less compact plant that can get up to 4 and even 6 feet tall, but be kind of looser in form and it won't flower as well and probably won't produce as much fruit in the deeper shade. But the new growth that comes out on these plants, and you see that same coppery new growth comes out on sun plants as well, like roses. Often the brand new leaf that comes out on a rose is like a kind of a cool brick red or sort of a reddish orange color, and then it fades to green. That's because new leaves are really tender, and they're fragile. They have they're not ready to see like intense sun. And an older leaf, such as this older Salal leaf, is stiff and green, and it has kind of a waxy cuticle that the plant has grown over top of it, which helps it photosynthesize but be able to like handle the sun conditions. A brand new leaf I think of as like an infant. Again, I'm always talking about babies. A brand new leaf is just like an infant. An infant can't stay out in the sunlight as long as I can, because I've got the equivalent of Salal's waxy cuticle all over my skin. I have older, more mature skin. Yeah, more mature for sure. More mature skin that can tolerate the sun, but an infant skin has less sun tolerance. The same with a young leaf. So in most cases, these young leaves come out on plants with plant sunscreen. And plant sunscreen is this red pigmentation that comes from basically a chemical that's produced inside the plant called anthocyanins. So when you see red lettuces or redder plants, usually, again, red foliage plants need to be in some sun and will like lose their red if they go into deep shade. So things like barberry, one of the beautiful red plants that we love to put into hot, dry, sunny conditions. If you put barberry, that purpley red barberry, into the shade, it's going to fade to kind of an olive green and lose that red because it's not necessary, and the plant doesn't need sunscreen any longer once it's gone into shade. So when you see that new growth and that gorgeous little kind of coppery, you can understand a little bit of plant science behind it, which I think just makes us all better people in general. So not to mention, now that we're all socializing again, gives you great cocktail party, fodder or whatever, so you can impress your friends and family with your knowledge. So when, again, we are talking I got carried away on anthocyanins, and we were talking about all these leaf colors. So we just stopped at green. Now there's variegated, of course, and variegated leaves are the two-tone leaves. So I have lots of examples kind of all around my table of different variegated leaves. I've got the variegated red twig dogwood here. So this is a shrub form of dogwood that can, I'll show you this beautiful plant. Shrub form of dogwood right now does not have red twigs, but it drops these beautiful variegated leaves in the fall after turning really pretty colors, and then gets more red bare stems that are kind of dramatic in the wintertime. This is a clean, kind of white-edged variegation on the twig dogwood, but we see yellow variegation on, this is actually a Daphne. This is a variety of Daphne that is a little bit more extreme with the variegation than kind of the more typical Daphne we see that's Oreo marginata. This is Moonlight Parfait. So again, great smell in the winter when it makes that lovely fragrant flower, but kind of a cool variegated leaf that really shows off in shade or partial shade. So again, great evergreen Daphne and that golden edged variegation on the leaves. Another golden edged variegation in a plant that we don't see quite as often, but is a fantastic shrub for dry shade. Now this is gilt-edged silverberry. So Elaeagnus is the variety, and you'll see again on your handout, it's down in the shrubs for dry shade. This is Elaeagnus ebingii gilt edge. So there's multiple varieties of Elaeagnus that are great when used in these kind of shady conditions. This is a fairly fast growing plant, although again, a note on plant growth. So even fast growing plants will grow slower in the shade. So most plants are going to take a little bit more time when growing in the shade compared to the same plant with more sun exposure, and that's just kind of the nature of shade. But the Elaeagnus varieties are fairly fast growers, even in quite a bit of shade. And this is a plant that can develop a little thorn, although gilt edge doesn't seem to make as much of a thorn. I've got another Elaeagnus over here in the corner that's kind of big to wrestle with, but this Elaeagnus over here makes quite a decent thorn. This is a funny named Elaeagnus called Hosoba fucurin. I know, I don't make these things up, but evergreen, drought tolerant, relatively fast growing, and now gilt edge is a good sized plant, 5 by 5. So even a nice kind of shade screen or screen. And there are varieties of Elaeagnus that get even larger than that. So you could have a nice kind of privacy screen or a screen from this plant in significant shade and even varying degrees of sun. It's also tolerant of full sun. So there's, again, not a lot of plants that'll go sun or shade, but always remember that that plant may have a different form or a slightly different growth habit when grown in different light conditions. So beyond kind of, your standard variegation, oh, and there's a cool variegated hosta. Here's wide brim here. I've got a golden grass, which looks golden until you look close up, and it has a tiny little green edge on the leaf. So another variegated style. And then I also have some silver or kind of whitish silver variegation. So this is so heavily variegated that you can almost not even see green. This is Brunera Jack Frost. And just because it's on, video, Brunera Jack Frost is giving us a show of its usually spring flowers. So cute little blue forget-me-not flowers, but a great large leaf, kind of low growing perennial for deep dry shade or even filtered sun is Brunera. Now, beyond using, again, shades of green, which include golds and chartreuse, but usually not reds unless it's the new growth of reds. So using shades of greens, we also experiment and combine leaf texture, and that includes like the surface of leaves. So we have everything from kind of, again, demonstrate the difference between, oh, I had a Sarkacoka, the difference between shiny, and I know we all know the difference, but we have shiny leaves, like these glossy green leaves of Sarkacoka, give us a natural sheen, and they pick up a little bit of light, even a little bit of light in the shade. Whereas we have some matte leaf, not shiny at all, from the Twig Dogwood, and usually a hosta as well is kind of, it's a larger leaf, but it still is a matte green, not a shine to the leaf. So if we're using large leaves, it's fun to juxtapose the matte green with something shinier, like this Burgunia, also known as pig squeak. This is a great variety, low-growing perennial that's evergreen, great for dry shade as well. So Burgunia has a shine, hosta has, you know, that matte leaf. So leaf texture and sheen, as well as going from finely divided leaves. We have Mahoneya Narahira here. Looks like a fern on steroids. So this is one of my absolute favorite forms of Mahoneya, which is a relative of our native Oregon grape. Narahira is best in partial sun, but can take pretty deep shade. You just won't get much flower, and again, it'll open up in deeper shade, and is one of the dry soil or dry garden type plants. So not tolerant of wet, boggy conditions, but more that dry filtered sun or shade. And Narahira only gets up to about 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide, makes a beautiful kind of lacy layered plant in the garden. That same coppery new growth, and the similar to other Mahonias, it has this like bright yellow or almost acid yellow chartreuse colored flower in late fall or even kind of midwinter that honeybees adore, and then later it can ripen into a cool blue fruit. So Narahira, it's evergreen. I don't know if I mentioned that. So evergreen, dry shade, 4x4, really just a looker, a very cool plant, and looks great when combined with some larger leaf shrubs in our garden. So we could combine that with akuba, which of course I don't have in stock today. Somebody came in and bought all of our Japanese akuba, but many of us are familiar with akuba. Good sized leaf on the akuba with kind of a, well, there's an all green variety, but usually we have a kind of a golden flecked, kind of paint splattered look to the leaf. There's akuba picturata. Mr. Goldstrike is another very well-known akuba. Great larger leaf, kind of on the shiny side, which gets up to about 4 to 6 feet tall, and a nice rounded plant. Slow growing, of course, because of the amount of shade that it tolerates, but looks great when combined with, again, that finer foliage of something like the Mahoneya. Now, ferns, even, you know, you think ferns are all lacy textured, but we can look at ferns and find that there is a lot of variety even from one fern to the next. So I was holding up and showing for lime green this holly fern. So this is one of our lovely evergreen ferns that's got a larger, bolder, shiny leaf. And then comparing that, of course, to one of the like frilliest and laciest of ferns. This is the Alaskan fern, Polystichum setiferum. And so between the two, even just landscaping with ferns, you can do a lot to get shine and a larger, bolder leaf and something that is a little bit frillier and finer leaves. I'm going to take those down and make a little bit more room on my table. Now, again, spiky growth habit, and different habits of growth on our plants will also kind of create that variation and interest throughout the garden. I went to Macy Guppy, if you're watching. I was at Macy Guppy's garden recently, and she's in kind of a deeper shade backyard space where she has a lot of mature landscape trees overhead, big canopy trees, cedars and firs, in a fairly dry shade garden, and she's got the most beautiful collection of sword ferns and a few other ferns, but really kind of a dominant sword fern is the evergreen kind of dominant feature in her backyard landscape. Now we're looking to enhance that with a few other things, but as an obvious, easy start, it is, again, sword ferns. They're native. They are evergreen. They are easy care and take that dry shade. Now, often if you walk around in most people's gardens, you just end up finding a sword fern because they've blown in or they've been brought by a bird, or, you know, they're just what we call volunteers. And they're in places that you would never expect a plant to grow, or that you wouldn't normally be able to even, you know, dig a hole and plant a plant. So we've got to love the volunteers. And often, like I said, they are natives or brought to us by birds. But sword fern are one of our kind of larger ferns in the landscape too. So they can get up to about 3 feet tall and wide, which usually we're thinking smaller scale for ferns. And on kind of the opposite side of the, you know, bigger scale of the sword fern would be that that lacy fine texture of something like the maidenhair fern. So this is the Himalayan maidenhair fern. This is a lower growing type of maidenhair, a little different from what we see in our native landscape as the western maidenhair. But maidenhair ferns tend to be deciduous, so they will drop their leaves in the winter, where a lot of our, you know, other ferns do keep their leaves. So you have options between ferns that go dormant in winter versus ferns that are permanent. And that, so far, the only one that we've shown that dies back in the winter is that maidenhair fern. While we're on ferns, and I'll show a few more real quick, this is similar to Alaskan fern, but a little bit of a larger, wider leaf. Again, shiny new growth, like it's been sprayed with leaf shine or something. And this is the tassel fern. So tassel fern's a decent sized fern, again, can get up to 2 to 3 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide. So cover quite a bit of space, give you a great low and wide, evergreen, lacy, airy texture. Again, combine that with something like a hosta, and we have a beautiful landscape juxtaposition using, again, the larger leaves, some matte, non-reflective matte surface, and the variegation of hosta with that shiny, lacy, low texture of the tassel fern. Now we see on this hosta that it is blooming, and I brought that because I thought it was fun. Those of us that aren't, you know, always familiar with the fact that hostas are in the lily family, and they do make flowers. The deeper the shade, you're probably not going to see a lot of blooms on hostas. So it is something that we get from hostas that are in partial sun exposure. Some, not this one, some are fragrant. This is wide brim, but I have often talked about some of my favorite fragrant hostas. One's called Guacamole, and it's got this great chartreuse, large chartreuse leaf with kind of a pale purple, almost white flower, very fragrant and lily scented, and what a great name too. So look for Guacamole, but again, deeper shade, you won't get much hosta flower. And I do have a hydrangea, so while we're talking about flowers and shade, and so I need to make some room on my table so I can reach the front row. So we've got some really great hydrangeas in stock at the garden center, and this is a variety called Seaside Serenade Cape Lookout. So Seaside Serenade is like a series of hydrangeas, similar to how Endless Summer has a series of hydrangeas. The Seaside Serenade series is of the next generation, so they are rebloomers. They are also more compact or kind of lower growing. So Cape Lookout is 3 by 3, so a really nice kind of manageable size of a hydrangea. I did not grab one that had a flower on it, but the flower is kind of a lime green, goes to white, and then fades, or as it ages, to kind of a very faint pink color. But hydrangea leaves also have that big, bold texture that is great in contrast, as we're talking about, with the smaller and the finer leaves that we often see in shade gardens as well. So even if it doesn't flower, there's a lot of hydrangeas that have variegated leaves or golden leaves and are lovely. But a word of caution about hydrangeas is they are not for dry shade necessarily. So there's one exception. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But most hydrangeas, hydration is kind of in their name. So hydrangeas love water, and they do better in moist shade or partial sun with regular moisture or even a little bit extra moisture, and especially at this, through this heat spell. So soak your hydrangeas well, give them extra shade if they are in some sun during this extremely hot temperatures. But I would not plant a hydrangea in the deepest, darkest shade of my garden and expect to see it really bloom very well. And the exception to that, moisture requirement, not necessarily light, is this gorgeous oak leaf hydrangea here. So this is an oak leaf hydrangea called, I think this is Snow Queen. This is Queen of Hearts. So we have a couple of different varieties of the hydrangea quercifolia, oak leaf hydrangea, and it's showing off its beautiful kind of lace cap style cone-shaped bloom right now. Oak leaf hydrangeas are named such because they have a different looking and shaped leaf. So closer to an oak leaf than our standard hydrangea leaf, which is more of just kind of a rounded leaf with little serrated edges. The oak leaf hydrangeas are tolerant of partial sun or dappled sun. I would not put them into the deepest, darkest shade. And they are also on the drier shade tolerant side. So once they're established, this is one hydrangea that has more drought tolerance than most other hydrangeas. And if you are in that kind of dappled or filtered light from the oak leaf hydrangea, the foliage will give you a burst of fall color from golds and oranges to kind of maroons and brick reds at the edges, even a little bit of kind of plums and burgundies before it drops its leaves in the winter. And the stems of the kind of the bare stems of an oak leaf hydrangea are also, they have their own beauty. So if you're not into sticks, I understand, but those of us that love plants learn to love them in all their phases. And in the winter, the bare sticks have sort of a peely bark, so you get a really interesting bark texture. And then the younger, newer growth has a little bit of sort of an orangey copper fuzz to it. So also, again, a little bit colorful even when it's not leafed out. Now, hydrangeas, let's see, what are some other fun things that I want to show? Okay, I don't have Japanese Aurelia on hand right now. I mean, I have it, but I didn't bring it in here. And that's Fatsia japonica. Japanese Aurelia is like big, shiny tropical leaves. As big as my head, as like I'm showing. Big tropical leaves on a plant that can grow fairly good size. And I'm talking 7, 8, 9, 12 feet tall, and sometimes about as wide. It doesn't look like it should live here, but it is evergreen. Does best with a little bit of protection, but again, shade often has given protection. So shade gardens have tree canopy that gives them extra kind of protection from frost or extreme conditions, or maybe a building that the planting is near, which also provides shade from extreme temperatures in a microclimate. But Fatsia japonica is the larger solid green version of this plant that's related to it. And this is Fatsia spider's web. So spider's web, you can see again that leaf. It's not quite as large, but this is a younger plant, so the leaves will get larger. But spider's web has this almost complete white variegation. So this leaf here is almost just a solid white with a little bit of green. And further down on the plant, often you'll see that the leaves, the older leaves, are like totally green. So Variegated plants, they have their own kind of subtle needs in the darker shade. And that's a good moment to stop and kind of talk again about plant science. So leaves are green because they're eating sunlight, right? And they eat sunlight through a chemical that the leaves produce called chlorophyll, and chlorophyll allows the leaves to photosynthesize. Chlorophyll is the green pigment that we see behind the leaves or in the leaves or whatever. But the less green a plant is, the less chlorophyll it has. So even a golden plant or a chartreuse plant, such as this one here, and certainly variegated plants, such as our twig dogwood or our spider's web Fatsia, have less chlorophyll in the leaves, which means that the leaves are not able to process the same amount of sunlight into food as a green leaf would. So new foliage kind of gets a pass for a while, you know. It's being supported by a lot of the old foliage that's been around, that's hardworking and contributing to the, you know, greater good of the plant. That's why lower leaves now are greener. They've got to do a lot of the hard work. The newer leaves have all of this beautiful coloration to them, but eventually, again, newer leaves will be lower positioned on the plant and need to lose that variegation and increase their chlorophyll content in order to be able to more efficiently photosynthesize and feed the plant. Similarly, in golden or chartreuse plants, such as this is Aurelia Sun King. And I know that you've been like looking at this plant on the table and wondering the whole time, what the heck is that? So this is golden Japanese spikenard. That's the common name of this. No wonder I use the botanical names. Aurelia Sun King is a perennial or shrub, kind of depending on how you want to look at it. It's a decent sized plant. You can see it easily get up to 5 feet tall, maybe even up to 6 feet wide. It's best in partial sun to get that really perfect chartreuse color. Too much sun and it's going to burn. Too little sun and it won't be quite as chartreuse. It's going to be more of like a lime green or a light green that you see usually lower down on the plant where it's shading itself. So in less light, even if you took this plant home and put it in lower light conditions, you would see it slowly kind of lose that extreme gold color and fade to just probably never be as dark a green as Narahira leaves, but it's going to fade to a darker green nonetheless. So we see that happen. Sometimes things change when we take them home as they are responding to the light or adjusting to kind of their new conditions. Some other really great plants that I have today that you'll see on the handout list. This is Liriope Big Blue. Liriope Big Blue has a grassy texture, which again is a whole nother kind of growth habit and texture that we can create interest with in the garden. This is an evergreen, and it's not even technically a grass. We keep it in the ground cover section because it does have a nice kind of wandering or meandering habit. Makes a great like border edge or kind of spreading border plant. As I mentioned, evergreen, and it does have a little kind of purplish flower in partial sun, but it grows in fairly deep dry shade as well and remains this nice deep green color. So Liriope Big Blue, just a great plant overall. A fun one that we don't have all the time is a lot of us that garden in the shade love begonias and grow begonias in, you know, pots and containers because it's one of the few things that gives us flowers and color in the shade. But this is a hardy begonia. So this is Begonia Grandis, which is not extremely common, but if you look closely, first of all, the kind of petiole or the stem where it connects to this gorgeous leaf has this really cool red kind of blotch on it. So you see the red blotch along the stem, doop, 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 and you see it kind of where the leaf is attached with this cool red blotch. Now, ultimately, we will also see the back of the leaf take on a little bit more of a rosy hue. This is a decent sized plant, 2 to 3 feet tall. You can see in the soil at the base of it, lots of tiny leaves of the same plant. These aren't weeds, these are more begonias that are starting to spread from the same plant. And in filtered light, maybe morning shade, morning sun, afternoon shade with a little bit of light, you won't just have cool leaves, it will make a small kind of light pink scallop shaped begonia flower as well. Hardy, dry, shade tolerant, spreads in the garden. Again, that big leaf that's kind of mesmerizing. It'll only get larger once it's planted in the garden. Oh, and I see maybe a flower bud starting on this guy. So we've had ours in filtered sun, so you can come see it and see the flower as well. So Begonia Grandis, just not your average shade plant, but really cool. I showed you the Burgunia, another fantastic group of perennial / shrubs that grow in filtered light, and certain varieties do better in deeper shade. These are hardy fuchsias. So hardy fuchsias do give us, of course, some flowers, but they're going to flower better with a little bit more light. This is a variety called Genie, which has that lime green foliage as well. So we have that kind of light green or chartreuse colored foliage. Genie grows to 2 by 2, and when hardy fuchsias are in the conditions that they bloom well, so at least some sunlight, a little filtered light, they flower from like May or June through September or October, and hummingbirds love them for sure. So they are a long blooming perennial that I think, even if it's not a big bloomer, makes a cute shrub with pretty leaves in the shade garden in addition. Now over here, oh, some other fun ones I've got on my right side that I almost can't reach. Let's talk about Osmanthus. Osmanthus, I have Osmanthus heterophyllus purpureus over here, and I'll take it a little bit lower so you can see it kind of up close. I have Osmanthus Burkwoodii, and then over here I have Osmanthus heterophyllus goshiki. So 3 different varieties of Osmanthus. You'll see also on your handout there's a Osmanthus delevi listed as well. I don't have that in stock right now. But even just between these three, come on, Sarkacoka, even between these 3 plants, you can see a nice variety of Osmanthus. Osmanthus is often called false holly because it does have kind of holly-like prickly leaves. But if we look at purpureus, no, that's not very purpurea. If we look at purpureus, the new growth is this really gorgeous kind of burgundy purple color. The stems are also purple, and then eventually the leaves fade to a nice deep green on an evergreen plant that is, again, pretty deep shade and dry shade tolerant versus, and it's going to fall over because it's a big plant in a little pot, versus the goshiki form, which has lower down, again, deeper green leaves. New growth is almost completely yellow with a little bit of green, and then the very tippy top is that same coppery, pretty coppery color. So goshiki, I believe, means 5 color. So there's 5 colors in the leaves. Apparently, you have to really count your greens. But a range of colors on something like the Osmanthus goshiki. These are heavy duty, easy care, low maintenance, evergreen for shade, and quite drought tolerant plants. So depending on the variety, we get different sizes. The purpureus is going to get up to about 10 feet tall. Goshiki is like 4 to 5 feet tall and wide, although slowly can get taller than that. And then Burkwoodii here, again, up to like 6-8 feet tall and wide, makes a nice screen even for shade, and it has a pretty white flower that's slightly fragrant in the spring. The last couple I want to talk about, one that I'm just about to kick around here, I took it down so we could talk Osmanthus. And these are plants that are, again, tolerant of dry and pretty deep shade. So deep shade, dry shade, even filtered light. They could take partial sun. They will burn with hot afternoon sun and turn kind of an unattractive yellowy color when it's too hot for them. The plant tends to be slow growing and has kind of an irregular, a little bit of an open, irregular shape to it in youth, but can be sheared or trimmed similar to how you would trim a boxwood to make it look a little bit tighter, more compact, and to give it a little bit more of a formal look and feel to it. Sarkacoka or sweetbox also has a ground cover form. That is Sarkacoka Cumulus, sometimes called the Himalayan sweetbox. That's like a 6 to maybe 12-inch tall plant that can really run quite a distance. So not like you wish you'd never planted it, but can easily get 6 feet wide and fill in a space that, again, is low light, low moisture, and give you really just a kind of a wonderful low maintenance, easy care ground cover. And while we're on that topic, easy care ground cover, can't quite reach Pachysandra. Yes. So Pachysandra, you'll see that again on the list. Pachysandra is one that tolerates varying degrees of deeper shade. It is an evergreen ground cover, but it's not like steppable. So it, you can see it's easily 4 to 6 inches tall, easily spreads a foot or more, and has that shine to the leaf. So this is a variety called Green Sheen with a shine to the leaf, but standard Pachysandra terminalis has a little bit less of a shiny leaf to it, and there's a variegated form of Pachysandra as well. So Pachysandra makes a nice ground cover. And then we will end on, I gotta come around the table to show you the Duke, but the Duke is worth showing. So here is, we talk about hemlocks, and this is a form of hemlock. This is an eastern hemlock, so this is Tsuga canadensis, and this is a variety called Golden Duke. Now, Golden Duke, new growth is that really beautiful chartreuse, but in quite a bit of shade, we'll probably see the older growth on the Duke mature to kind of a pale green or more of a green. Full shade or partial shade, and even I would say it could take full open sun, but just again, not reflective heat or it'll sunburn. I kind of look at the Duke as like a redhead, so he wears his t-shirt in the pool. The Duke is a slow grower, 6 to 10 feet tall, but 2 to 3 feet wide, and again, that's in like a 10-year time span. And if 6 to 10 feet tall is too much for your space, but you like that lacy, light texture that the Duke provides, evergreen, did I mention that? Then there's a Golden Duchess. So the Duke's lady is a little bit smaller. Golden Duchess is about half the size. So 3 to 4 feet tall, for example. Same golden lacy texture. You can come and see the Duke and Duchess here at the Garden Center. We've got them quite a few on hand in the Lake Oswego store right now. And with that, this is a cute little Western Bleeding Heart again from our native section. I love this plant because it doesn't go to sleep like a lot of bleeding hearts do this time of year. Lacy, kind of a blue-gray leaf to it, foliage, and then slightly different than our standard bleeding heart in the flowers, but blooms over a longer period of time. So a flower up, flower bud coming, and a flower bud being formed at mid-level, and I see one at the ground. So although this isn't a huge plant right now, it'll make a nice kind of naturalized ground cover and spread in dry or open shade. So not into the deepest shade, it won't bloom for you very well. But that again is kind of the lesson, maybe one of the lessons of the day is use green, use foliage in texture, different or shiny, different, and even in habits versus from grassy to meadowing to upright and narrow, to create all of the visual interest that a shade garden provide. And you'll often find not only is it a more overall more relaxing garden, but in the end, are a lot less maintenance than those with a lot of flowers because you don't have to do all that deadheading. So with that being said, I hope you will all enjoy this kind of string of hot weather in however form you do. If you sit and relax in the garden or work out in your shade landscape, or if you do it, happy gardening. Thanks for watching.